So the attorneys come on. Tyler Cox makes that statement, willing to bet his reputation that Ben Crump and the family haven't turned the phone over. What did you make of that?
I mean, I was stunned when they said it, right? I mean, when I invited them on the show, I didn't really think they were going to break news. I thought they were going to more talk about the defamation lawsuits that they were talking about, et cetera. But when he said that, I sort of paused and I was like, whoa, wait a second. He's accusing them of withholding evidence from the investigation. And sort of that's what everyone is calling for, right? Which is everyone saying, let the investigation proceed. Let's see what the investigation turns up. And you gotta hope that the family is going to be willing to turn over the phone as part of that investigation.
There is a document that could end months of speculation about how an 18-year-old died on a Mississippi island. It's finished. It has been finished for weeks. It is sitting inside a government office right now, and by law, almost no one is allowed to read it. Not you, not most reporters, not even the independent doctor the family hired to check the state's work. You already know the outline of this case: the boat, the island, the boy who didn't come home. What you probably don't know is what's happening right now, quietly, behind a wall of sealed paperwork, judicial procedure, and a district attorney who's gone on camera to explain, in her own words, why she's staying silent. That's what this video is actually about. Not just what happened to Nolan Wells, but why, nearly 6 weeks later, the one document that might answer that question is legally off limits, and what has to happen before that changes. Quick refresher, because the details matter for what's coming. On July 4th, 2026, Nolan Wells traveled to Horn Island, off the Mississippi coast, with a group of friends for a holiday gathering. At some point that day, the group's boat began taking on water. Friends have told investigators they left the island early, and that Wells told them he'd stay behind and catch a later ride with other people in the group. That was the last time his friends say they saw him. When Wells never came home, his mother and one of his friends reported him missing. 2 days later, on July 6th, his body was found on the island. According to prosecutors, the official state autopsy was actually completed just 1 day after that, on July 7th. But here's the part almost nobody talks about. Completing an autopsy and releasing an autopsy are two completely different things. The state didn't publicly confirm the report even existed until weeks later. And when it did, the message wasn't, "Here's what we found." It was, "You're not going to see this yet." So if the report exists, why isn't it public? This is where most coverage of this case stops, with a shrug, or with speculation. We're going to do something different. We're going to show you exactly what the district attorney said, on the record, and let you decide if it holds up. On July 23rd, Jackson County District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath released a video statement addressing the sealed report directly. She explained that in her jurisdiction, nearly every death that isn't from natural causes or a routine traffic accident is automatically presented to a grand jury before results go public. That's not something invented for this case, she said. It's a standing policy. Here's part of what she said, in her own words. The pressure for answers does not change what the work requires. She went further, arguing that staying quiet isn't the same as hiding something, that restraint, in her words, exists to protect the integrity of the investigation and the grand jury process itself, not to keep the public in the dark. Now, is that the full explanation? Maybe. But it raises a second question that's arguably more interesting than the first. If this is just routine procedure, why has this case generated so much distrust that the DA felt she needed to explain routine procedure on camera in the first place? While the state was sitting on its own report, the Wells family wasn't waiting. They commissioned their own independent autopsy, led by forensic pathologist Dr. Roger Mitchell, and results were announced at a press conference in Chicago on July 22, timed to the NACP's National Convention, with family attorney Ben Crump standing alongside Wells's parents. Here's the part that should genuinely surprise you if you assumed the independent autopsy would settle things. It didn't. The independent report listed the cause and manner of death as undetermined, pending further investigation. And the reason why is almost stranger than the mystery itself. By the time the family's doctor got access to the body, key tissue, specifically parts of the airway and lungs, had already been removed during the state's own autopsy. Dr. Mitchell has said that's a common practice in forensic examinations, not necessarily suspicious on its own, but it meant the second opinion the family was counting on couldn't give them the clarity they wanted. As of the most recent reporting, that same doctor was still trying to gain access to Wells's throat for additional examination, tissue that, according to officials, wasn't available during that second autopsy at all. 2 autopsies, one paid for by the state, one paid for by the family, and neither one, so far, has produced a public, conclusive answer. Here's where this video earns its title, because this is the detail that barely made national headlines, and it changes how you should be reading everything else in this case. This isn't only a story about threats against witnesses, though that's real, and we'll get to it. It's also a story about a threat against a judge. According to reporting connected to the investigation, authorities arrested a man from California accused of making online threats targeting Chancery Court Judge Ashley Cole, a judge whose family has reportedly been connected to the broader investigation. That detail alone tells you something important. The pressure around this case isn't just aimed at the teenagers who were on that boat. It's reached into the judicial system itself. And that arrest doesn't stand alone. Separately, 3 additional people have been criminally charged for threatening witnesses connected to the Wells investigation in 3 different incidents. One of them, Edward James Porter, is accused of calling 2 witnesses multiple times in late July and threatening to kill them and their families, according to a probable cause affidavit obtained by NBC News. So, by the most recent count, this single death investigation has produced at least 4 separate criminal cases. Not about what happened to Nolan Wells, but about what people online and offline have been willing to do because of it. Now, here's the detail almost no one outside of local coverage has actually unpacked, and it's the reason the phrase "sealed until the grand jury" matters more than it sounds. An independent review, separate from either autopsy, was conducted analyzing photographs, videos, GPS coordinates, and witness accounts tied to Wells' final hours. It's a 22-page report, and it draws no conclusions about criminal or civil liability. But it does identify something specific, what the report calls a material gap in the timeline, a stretch of time between the last independently corroborated sighting of Wells and the moment his friends say the boat carrying him actually left the mainland for the island. In plain terms, there's a stretch of time in this story that isn't backed up by anything except people's word. That's not an accusation. Investigators haven't said that gap is evidence of wrongdoing, and neither should we. But it's exactly the kind of gap that a grand jury, with subpoena power, sealed autopsy results, and access to evidence the public doesn't have, exists to examine. Which brings us back to where we started. But before we get to that answer, it's worth pausing on why this case escalated the way it did. Because the pressure surrounding this investigation isn't just organic public interest. It's been amplified, deliberately, by some of the most recognizable names in the country. Actor and filmmaker Tyler Perry and civil rights leader the Reverend Al Sharpton each pledged $50,000 for information leading to an arrest in this case. Sharpton announced that pledge standing alongside Wells's parents at his funeral in Ocean Springs. NFL wide receiver Terrell Owens added $25,000 on top of that. Then a father of one of the teenagers who was on Horn Island that day, a man not accused of any wrongdoing, matched Sharpton's $50,000 offer himself on behalf of his own family, bringing the total reward pool to $175,000. That's a lot of money riding on a case where, officially, investigators haven't said they believe a crime occurred at all. And that tension, celebrity-backed reward money for an arrest, layered on top of a death authorities have called a likely accidental drowning, is part of what's fueling the theories. It's also, according to Mississippi's district attorney, part of why officials say they're being careful about what they release and when. She's publicly urged people to avoid misinformation circulating online, saying investigators have reviewed every credible lead that's come in. There's also the question of race, which has shaped coverage of this case from the beginning. Wells was black. Most of the friends he was with on Horn Island that day were white. Family attorney Ben Crump has said publicly that he believes race may have played a role in the circumstances surrounding Wells's death, and in how quickly, or slowly, the investigation moved. Mississippi officials haven't confirmed or denied that framing directly. Their public statements have focused instead on defending the standard nature of their sealed autopsy, grand jury process. That disagreement, itself unresolved, is part of what's kept this story in the national conversation for 6 straight weeks. It's worth being precise about what a grand jury process can and can't do here too, because a lot of online speculation skips this part. A Mississippi grand jury doesn't rule on guilt. It doesn't hold a trial. Its only job is to review the evidence prosecutors present, including that sealed autopsy, and decide whether there's enough to justify formal charges against a specific person. If jurors vote yes, that becomes an indictment, and the case moves into open court, where evidence becomes public and a defense gets to challenge it. If jurors vote no, prosecutors generally can't bring charges on the same evidence later, and in practice, the case is likely to remain what officials have called it from the start, an accidental drowning, without an assigned cause beyond that. Both of those outcomes are still fully on the table right now. Neither has happened yet. Now, let's talk about the friends who were actually on that boat, because they've largely been drowned out by everything happening around them. Attorneys representing 3 of Nolan Wells' friends have publicly pushed back against the wave of online accusations aimed at their clients, describing the teenagers as completely innocent and caught in the middle of a situation they didn't create. That's not a claim we can independently verify either way. It's their attorney's position, stated on the record, and it deserves to be presented as exactly that, a position, not a verdict. It's a useful reminder of something that gets lost in true crime coverage generally. Right now, there is no publicly named suspect in this case. No one has been charged with causing Nolan Wells harm. The friends who were on the boat have not been accused by prosecutors of anything. The threats, the arrests, the reward money, all of that is real, and all of it is happening in parallel to an investigation that, as of this recording, has not concluded that a crime occurred at all. That distinction matters, because it's exactly what a defense attorney would lean on if this case ever reaches a courtroom. If the grand jury does return an indictment, the defense's first move would almost certainly be to highlight the same gap in the evidence we just described, that stretch of time in the timeline that isn't independently corroborated. A prosecution needs more than an unexplained gap. It needs evidence that connects a specific person to a specific act. Right now, publicly, that evidence hasn't been shown to exist. Whether it exists privately, inside that sealed grand jury presentation, is exactly what nobody outside investigators currently knows. There's one more detail worth flagging, because it tells you how strange the information environment around this case has become. State officials have specifically warned the public about fake documents circulating online, material designed to look like leaked autopsy findings or investigative records, but that officials say isn't authentic. In a case already defined by a lack of official information, that's created a vacuum that misinformation has been filling in real time. If you've seen a leaked report about this case anywhere online, official sources have said, as of this recording, no such report has been legitimately released. So why is the autopsy being kept from the public? Based on everything we can verify, not because Mississippi officials have said there was foul play, and not because they've said there wasn't. It's being kept sealed because state law and standard county procedure route nearly every non-natural death through a grand jury before anything becomes official, and prosecutors say releasing partial results now could compromise that process before it's finished. What happens next is straightforward, at least on paper. Prosecutors present the completed autopsy, along with other investigative evidence, directly to the Jackson County grand jury. That grand jury will decide one thing: whether there's enough evidence to bring a criminal charge in connection with Wells' death. If they decide there is, an indictment could follow, and this case moves into a courtroom. If they decide there isn't, Wells' death may legally close as an accidental drowning, the manner of death authorities have said, from the beginning, they consider most likely, without anyone ever being charged. Both outcomes are still on the table, and as of now, there is no public timeline for when the grand jury will meet. What we do know is that every party involved is positioning for whichever outcome comes next. Attorneys connected to the case are reportedly preparing for possible civil litigation separate from the criminal process, meaning that even if the grand jury declines to indict anyone, this story may not be over. A civil case operates under a different, lower burden of proof than a criminal one, and doesn't require prosecutors to bring charges at all. It only requires the Wells family, if they choose to pursue it, to convince a jury by a preponderance of the evidence, not beyond a reasonable doubt, that someone is legally responsible. That's worth sitting with, because it means the sealed autopsy isn't just the key to a possible criminal case. It's also likely to become central evidence in a civil case, if one is filed, regardless of what the grand jury ultimately decides. In other words, even the outcome that looks the most final, no indictment, might not actually close this story. So the honest answer to when will we know what happened to Nolan Wells is not yet, and not necessarily soon. Grand juries in Mississippi don't operate on a public schedule, and prosecutors have given no indication of a firm date. What we can say, based on everything currently on the record, is that the machinery is moving. The autopsy is done. The independent review has flagged a gap in the timeline. The evidence is being assembled for presentation. The question that remains isn't whether investigators have information, it's when, and under what circumstances, the public will finally be allowed to see it. That's the loop this case is stuck in. A completed report nobody can read, a second autopsy that raised more questions than it answered, a documented gap in the timeline nobody's explained, and a legal process built to take exactly as long as it takes, regardless of how many reward dollars, celebrity statements, or threats pile up around it. That's the story right now, not a cover-up, not a confession, but a system deliberately built to move slower than public attention, holding one document that everyone wants and almost no one can read, while a grand jury somewhere in Jackson County, Mississippi, quietly decides what happens next. A final note, this case remains an active, unresolved investigation. No one has been charged in connection with Nolan Wells' death, and officials have not confirmed a cause of death. The details in this video are drawn from court documents, official statements, and reporting from named news organizations, and will be updated as the investigation develops. If you want to see this case followed as it develops, including whatever the grand jury decides, please subscribe to this channel.